professor here. So most of my students call me Miss Shunick or Miss S. I'm in the STEM division in the biology department. So I do primarily teach anatomy and physiology here, but I also do the forensic science courses, and I'm the biotech director with the SLT program. Have you all heard about the Science Lab Tech program? What happened with this?
It's back on.
Anyway, ghosts. Today I'm here to talk to you about something that is not related to my career here. I have another career. I'm a missing person expert, and so I'm going to talk to you all about how I became a missing person expert, and then we're going to get into the ethics of true crime. So without judgment, who in here consumes true crime content? Yeah. A lot of us do, and I suppose when I was younger I listened to some true crime stuff, and technically I still do if Dan Cummins counts. He's a comedian, but he does talk about crime sometimes. And then I did check out the podcast I think you guys have been listening to this semester, Counterclock, and so we'll talk about that a little bit too. But today the big topic we're getting into is true crime ethical? I'm going to tell y'all right now that this is a gray area, and I suppose as trigger warnings, we're going to talk about murder, sexual assault, and probably a few other crimes that are, hard to deal with. So, be warned. I don't know how much prep your professor gave you. So I'm here representing today, I have a nonprofit called Resource Association for Missing People. We turned 10 in September. I've been doing this for 12 years. And I just recently started a consulting business called Shunick Missing Persons. So I've been working on consulting law enforcement and media on how to work with the loved ones of missing persons. And I'll talk a little bit more about what my nonprofit and stuff does in a bit. First, we have to talk about the sad stuff. And this is personal, this is my life. And so I got brought into the world of crime on May 19th, 2012. My little brother was graduating from high school this day. My sister, Mickey, didn't show up, which was unusual, but she was also 21 and kind of, being 21. So at first we weren't that alarmed. Later in the day when we didn't hear from her, we realized something was probably wrong. And we know that she was last seen on her bicycle. So we called the police and filed a missing person report. Little did we know that for 3 months, my family and I would be searching for her. Her missing person case was extremely high profile for the time. In 2012, this was before true crime existed in the way we know it. And true crime, come on in, really exploded because of podcasts. So I'm sure a lot of y'all consume podcasts. We're definitely going to talk about that. I've actually been battling with a very big podcast, as I've learned, for the last 2 weeks. It's been a nightmare. And so this is my family. So I have a little brother. His name is Zach. This is my sister, Mickey. And these are my parents. And so Mickey was missing for about 3 months. Now, one of the reasons it went high profile is something we're going to talk about. It's the way that media interacts with cases in general. Have y'all heard of missing white woman syndrome? Right? And so we knew that we were lucky because look at her. She was young, blonde, white, beautiful, and she disappeared under mysterious circumstances. And so the other thing that was beneficial to us is that I am 2 years older than she was, and we looked really similar. So I ended up being the primary spokesperson for my family with media and everything like that, which I was not anticipating, but that's just how it worked out. Luckily, and this was before I was teaching, I was in graduate school, I found out I'm pretty good at public speaking and okay under pressure, so I was able to support my family. And the reason I got brought into this is because as the police were looking for her, I'm from Lafayette, this happened in Lafayette. I happened to be walking around sort of searching for her, and they stopped me thinking that I was her. So then I went on TV, I said, Mickey and I are different people, she's still missing, I know we look similar, but we are different. And so anyway, this is kind of what we're leading into, because the way that this has impacted my life cannot be overstated. And so this case was extremely high profile. We did all the things that you see on TV and in movies. We're meeting with Nancy Grace. We're meeting with Judge Amy. We're having these massive candlelight vigils. The media, it was international about 6 days in. And I was doing media coverage from like 5 a.m. till 10 o'clock at night, any type of meeting you can possibly imagine. People were extremely invested. And I will say the third thing that allowed this case to go extremely high profile was that the community of Lafayette is extremely supportive. And when I tell y'all that there was days where like 10,000 people were coming out to look for her through foot searches, I mean it. It was insane. So we had a really big search and rescue organization get involved, Texas EquiSearch. Have y'all heard of them? They do civilian search and rescue organizations work on behalf of the police. So often they were going over areas the police had already searched, looking for more information, and they really are doing two things, either finding a living person or looking for remains. And of course, while my sister was missing, we were hoping she was living. Now that I've worked in this for 12 years almost, May will be the 12-year anniversary, I realized we were looking for someone who was no longer alive, you know? And so what happened? My sister was biking home one night. It was a Friday night, and it was after midnight. I can't remember exactly what time because trauma brain erases memory. And this man saw her biking. He had been calling prostitutes for hours and couldn't get a hold of anyone. And we found this out because of CCTV footage. So she was biking, she went off-road to go through a neighborhood. He followed her, he bumped her off her bicycle. So one of the first big pieces of evidence was actually finding this bike that you see here. I actually have it. I don't know if that's weird, it's in my house right now. My parents were gonna sell it or give it away, and I was like, no, we're gonna keep that. I don't want some random person to have it, because people sell murder victim stuff online for money, and that's weird. And so anyway, he bumped her off her bike. He says that she got into the vehicle. I really doubt it. To make a long story short, there was a physical altercation. She pepper sprayed him. He had a knife. She somehow got the knife out of his hand, stabbed him a couple times. He got the knife, stabbed her back. He thought she was deceased, so he started driving out to an isolated location, not in Lafayette, somewhere near Opelousas. At this point, my sister had basically been playing dead, although she would have succumbed to these injuries. She could not have survived these stabbings, but she was still alive. When he parked his car, and it was the place where he left her remains after the fact, she popped up with a knife in her hand and stabbed him in the neck, missed all the important stuff. He had a gun, shot her in the head, and that was it. His intention was to sexually assault her, but she kicked his ass, so he couldn't. And so that's another reason why I think people are still telling her story. Now, because my sister fought with him and left a bunch of evidence, and there was a bunch of blood evidence. His name's Brandon Laverne. This is actually the only time I've ever showed his face or mentioned his name because we're learning here. He left evidence. He burned his truck out in Houston. She destroyed his hand, so he came and had surgery here in New Orleans at Ochsner. And there was many other bits of evidence that he left behind. So like, he's not good at murdering people. Yeah, he did a really bad job. And he was obviously freaking out because I am anticipating he probably didn't expect my sister's case to be an international, like, high-profile case, but it was. And so after that, that's when he made a lot of mistakes. But he had just got out of prison maybe 8 months before for sexually assaulting someone. And another good thing, I guess, that came out of this is that we also caught him for another murder. And this is Lisa Pate. So I hadn't heard of her. And I don't have time to get into like what it's like to go through a homicide investigation, but the police don't tell you anything. By the time we're going to court and we're at the DA's office is when you find out actual information. And this is after my sister's recovered. You know, like if you look at the Idaho 4 case right now, people are making up all these myths and rumors. Even the family members don't have information. And I think that's something that the public is not aware of. The families don't get information because if they tell their friends tell friends, and that's how the suspect and his defense team finds out stuff that can harm the case, right? And so we didn't know anything. We're at the DA's office. They're like, we can take the death penalty off the table if you want, if he'll show us where Mickey is. And we said, absolutely, who cares about the death penalty? He's probably gonna get life in prison. We wanna know where Mickey is. And so he did show the police where she was. And it was in a shallow grave outside of a cemetery, so like, we never would have found her. And it wasn't in our parish, so like, again, like we weren't searching there, and neither were police or search and rescue. At the same time, they said he's suspected of another murder, which he admitted to when he was in prison for that rape that he got out on. And the reason that this didn't go to trial is because the person with the most information was his cellmate. And sometimes cellmates will say stuff just to kind of like, yeah, he's cruising, to, try to get out earlier or whatever. And so he was also convicted of murdering Lisa Pate, so her family got justice as well. So overall, as far as things go, we were very unlucky in what happened to my sister, but we were lucky in the fact that, first of all, we found her after 3 months. The missingness is significantly worse than experiencing a murder. I'll tell you that right now, because how many times do you think we imagined her getting murdered? So many times. When you don't know where someone is and you know that something bad happened that intervened with their life, your memory or your imagination goes wild, and anything you can possibly think of that you've ever seen in a movie, that's what you're imagining is happening to your loved one. It's really bad. And so I do think if he had just killed her and left her somewhere, we would be dealing with a totally different scenario. But because she was missing, it was very mysterious, there was a physical altercation, and he was caught for 2 murders, this case has exploded. Now, this case happened almost 12 years ago. And we did a lot of media coverage. We did the Dateline NBC thing. We met with Investigation Discovery. I fought with Lifetime and Hallmark and places like that to not make movies or documentaries about her life. I fought with people to not make books about her life because my sister wouldn't have wanted all this stuff to be made about her. And in my family's opinion, we did the TV shows, we did some radio shows, we did some podcasts. We gave the public the conclusion that they needed in order to understand what happened. And what you're not thinking about when you're going through something like this is that you're still going to be dealing with this over a decade later. And the true crime nature of this is ruining my life. So that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. So do I think true crime is ethical? Not really, but we're going to talk about the exceptions. So I created my nonprofit. Really, I was working on a missing person case when my sister was still missing. This woman's name is Keosha Felix. She's still missing. She was sold domestic human trafficking by her family. And she went missing, disappeared from Lafayette to Houston. And then this is a bad picture, but I started this business in September so I could start making like YouTube videos and stuff and try to make some income for the nonprofit. So now I make educational videos for family members with missing people so that they kind of know what they should be doing. When you report someone missing and you ask the police what to do, they say, do whatever you feel. Well, what the hell does that mean? What does that mean? So my sister's friends really kind of initiated this big thing that we went through. And so when we're talking about true crime, the first thing we kind of want to understand is what it means to be ethical and what the difference between content creation is from journalism. And I'll say this before we get into this, big media is also an issue. Are they always kind and do they treat everyone with respect? No, but I'll give them credit where credit's due. They do it to our face. If they're gonna make something about us, if they're gonna talk about us, they say it to us before they make it. Content creators do not do this. They don't acknowledge people. They don't ask permission. They do not tell you that they're gonna make a story about your life for profit. And that's where this ethical gray area exists. Is it legal? Sure. Is it ethical? No. So what does it mean to be ethical? This means that we are relating to moral principles. What is morality? That's where we look at that subjective thing, because what I find to be moral is going to be different than what you guys find to be moral, right? And especially if you don't have lived experience with some very serious trauma, it's hard to imagine what it's like for people to constantly use your life story over and over again for various reasons. And so it's concerned with the principles of right and wrong. Again, what does that mean? It depends. And it means that we're going to maintain high principles. So the difference that we see with media is they follow a code of ethics. People in media go to school. They get trained on how to interact with people. They get trained on how to handle sensitive subjects and topics. How to get people to open up and tell a story appropriately. Is this law? Do they always follow it? No. But for the most part, almost every media person I've spoken with, whether they were local from Lafayette or around here, or a national or international group, we still talk. And like when Dateline NBC is going to re-air my sister's story, they tell me so that I can prepare emotionally. Because when that story airs on TV, thousands of people come through my email and social medias and DMs and stuff, and they act like it's something that just happened, so the things that they say are very raw. But to me, it's a Wednesday and I'm getting ready to teach a lecture. You know what I mean? And I think that true crime is in this place now where people are removed from this, that we treat it like fiction and kind of forget that this happened to real people and that people involved are still alive and dealing with this on a day-to-day basis. So like the amount of trauma that you go through, again, like really can't be overstated. And it's not like I'm speaking only for myself. I've worked with thousands of families. I'm speaking on behalf of all of us, the good and bad. And so what is the code of ethics? We're not going to read all this, but let's look at the main talking points here. Seek truth and report it. Ethical journalism should be accurate and fair. Journalists should be honest and courageous in gathering, reporting, and interpreting information. Minimize harm. This is a big one. Ethical journalism treats sources, subjects, colleagues, and members of the public as human beings deserving of respect. That's where true crime content creators and some media really drop the ball. Because they don't even treat murder victims like they were actual human beings. They treat them like they were made up. Act independently. The highest and primary obligation of ethical journalism is to serve the public. Is it independent to take a story that other media companies have told and regurgitate it with your spin on it? No. You haven't done any investigation. You've Googled it. You decided, hey, this looks like it'll make us some money or get us some clicks and likes. What a crazy story to tell. I'm going to tell it. And they don't even think about us. Be accountable and transparent. Ethical journalism means taking responsibility for one's work and explaining one's decisions to the public. So what is true crime? We all know. But you see books, podcasts, films, documentaries, it's never been more popular. And this is where people, and it says authors, right, not journalists, where authors and other random people are taking criminal cases that have gone to court and are now public information, and they're telling the story with their own opinions and spin on it. Some issues with this is that their opinions sometimes are incorrect, and some of the information they find is outdated and not the most up-to-date and current information. And so really what they end up doing is spreading a lot of myths, rumors, and misinformation, especially because they do not contact family members. So what do they know? Whatever they see online, right? So we can talk about this, and y'all feel free to ask questions or make comments too. What is the goal of true crime? Why do you think true crime content creators are doing this? Sensationalism. A lot of them say, well, it's to raise awareness. And to a certain extent, that is true, because I work on lots of cold cases where people have been missing. A long-term missing person case is 3 months. A cold case is 1 year. So I work on lots of cold cases and long-term cases where I would love for a content creator to make a story about that case, but they never do. And the question we have to ask is why? And so their goal is to raise awareness, so they say. If we're not contacting family members, and if we're not figuring out more information, looking at friends, talking to police involved in the case, what kind of information and awareness is being spread? Information that already exists. There's nothing new. Nothing new. In my opinion, the goal of true crime content creators is that they do care about people to a certain extent. They enjoy learning about crime, and they found a really great way to make money. So let's look at some of the information out there. True crime content creators that have solved crimes. Now there is a list of podcasts, 7 podcasts that have played a role in cracking a case. Do you think that these individuals actually solved the crime because they found information? No. what true crime has a place with is engaging the public. And this is what I try to help family members do early on, because the longer a person is missing, the harder it gets to solve that case. Especially after like 2 weeks. One of the biggest pieces of evidence you look for is CCTV footage, and security camera footage. That solves so many cases. And after it goes away, you lose such a big chunk of information in a timeline. And that timeline and last known location is the key to finding someone, or at least knowing where they may be. There's like a case of a young man who probably fell into a river right now. I don't know if y'all saw that in, I think, Pennsylvania. We know probably where he went in, but once you're in a body of water, it's pretty tough. So what have these podcasts done? And why are podcasts solving cases or getting more information than other types of content creators? Podcasts often deep dive into cases. And these are podcasts that have actually done entire seasons about one specific case, like what Counterclock is doing. And what I will say about Counterclock, in my opinion, she is approaching this ethically. She's doing investigative journalism, and there's something that you can use to figure that out. She interviews family members. She has people talking about the person who was killed, at least in the season that I've been checking out. Now, I have listened to some of these. Like, I listened to the Tara Grinstead episode. Are y'all familiar with this? So this was one of the first big podcasts I listened to. Tara Grinstead was a cold case, a teacher who went missing in Georgia. And she had been missing at this point, when he told this story, I believe, for a decade. Maybe slightly more or less than that. But anyway, because it got so much attention, it was like a very prominent podcast. One of the people involved in her disappearance ended up telling his partner, and once they kind of broke up, she told the police. So this podcast did not solve this case, but it happened to raise enough awareness so that something happened. This is what true crime is good for. And if you look at these different scenarios, this is all community engagement where someone got enough information to actually go and get some evidence to law enforcement. Podcasters and true crime content creators and any of us that get involved, we can't solve cases. That is what law enforcement does, and that's what detectives are there for. Why do cases go cold? Because they run out of stuff to look at, and sometimes they do not look at cases. I'll be honest with you guys. One of the biggest battles I put up often is fighting with law enforcement in a professional way to get them to actually do their job, okay? So I'm not saying police are perfect, and neither is big media, but there's a place for this stuff. And so a podcast that's willing to do an entire season about a case probably will stir up some information that can be helpful. When we look at really high-profile YouTubers and TikTokers as well, they don't solve cases. We've never seen an incidence of that, because the way that they share information is by doing one story really quickly. If it's TikTok, maybe 10 minutes, probably like a couple. And on YouTube, maybe 15 minutes to an hour long episode. So every time they put out content, it's some new case. And they usually don't do follow-ups unless it's like high profile happening. Like, how many YouTubers have been covering the Idaho 4 massacre? A lot. And they give updates every time information comes out. Do I have a problem with that personally? Yes, because these people don't know how the criminal justice system works, and they are hurting cases. Even the judge for the Idaho 4 case right now has said, because of TikTokers and YouTubers, they're probably not going to televise that case because of the community involvement. So when we start to look at this, it does become an issue. So where does true crime have a role? It's to help people that need help and assistance. They're helping people with cold or unsolved cases, maybe unidentified remains, trying to figure out who they are, by engaging community involvement and increasing awareness. Outside of that, why are we covering solved cases? Like, for example, maybe I shouldn't say this, but I will. I'll probably edit it out. I've been fighting with do y'all know who that is? They're a big okay, I don't keep up with true crime. After I started some beef with them on TikTok, I found out that they're a really, really big podcast that they have like a cult following of fans. Like, people have been yelling at me a lot. Where was I going with this though? because it's been traumatic, not really traumatic, but it's been extremely frustrating. So what are people saying about he's being able to tell my sister's story? It doesn't matter if it's solved. This is public information and it's freedom of speech. Anyone can do whatever they want with your sister's story. I didn't say it was illegal. I said it should be illegal to profit off of murder without permission, but I said it's unethical. And why are they telling my sister's story? There's only one reason. It's to make money. It's missing white woman syndrome. And I'm not saying that white women don't deserve to have their stories told, but why are they told so often? Who else tells a bunch of stories about missing white women and murdered white women? The media. So when we look at the way these podcasts, YouTubers, TikTokers are interacting with cases, they perpetuate the same issues in media that we see with regular media. And there's a big issue with that. They are quite literally using my sister's solved case that's nearly 12 years old to make money. This particular podcast put her story behind a paywall for their Patreon subscribers. And you can't argue with me that they did that because they wanted to raise awareness. You can Google, do women get murdered by strange men when they're alone? Yes, we all know that. And I'm not saying my sister's story doesn't deserve to be told, but y'all, there are thousands of episodes about it. TV shows have been made, podcast episode, YouTube, TikTok. I've been arguing with all of them, and I've been emailing everyone to take their content down, and they're not happy about it because it's hurting their pockets. What do they think it's doing to my family? It sucks. And how do I find out about this? Because people message me and interrupt my daily life saying, oh, I'm so sorry about your sister, blah, 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 blah. And they mean it with well intention, not realizing that it has been nearly 12 years. And I'm like, thanks, I wasn't thinking about her murder, but I am now. I appreciate it. So am I biased? Like, am I a true crime content creator hater? Yeah. But it's only because of my experience. And I do listen to some content, and I do watch some YouTube videos, especially when police are interviewing suspects, because that is where a lot of the way you see how detect like what their role really is comes through. And do I think all true crime is terrible? No. My big gripe with it is, why are they not contacting family members? They're looking at my social medias. They're looking at my websites and stuff and seeing stuff that my family has put out recently. How can they not contact us? Especially if they're going to put it behind a paywall or with advertisement revenue or monetization. That's the thing I'll never understand. Sure, it's legal, but it is not ethical. It is not. Because we are, you know what they call us, living victims. Because we were also impacted by my sister's murder. We're not dead, but we deal with it every day. So what are the issues? Because they often don't contact family members, there is no new information. There's no new information. And there's a lot of stuff that happened in my sister's case that we didn't share with the public. That is like tea. You know, it's spicy, it's interesting. Like recently I released the fact that while my sister was missing, the man that murdered her, Brandon, he called my mom because we put her number out publicly. And he also showed up to the headquarters while we were getting the community together to search for her. Okay, so like this stuff that you see in TV actually does happen. So like, how would the podcast know that? They wouldn't, because they're not talking to us. Would we agree to do these episodes? Absolutely not. But a lot of families would. And when people actually do contact us, I give them lists of other families that really need the support. Usually I try to find some that are more sensational or kind of like sexy, and they still do not pursue those leads. Why? It's about money. There's a selection bias. So this, you know, I don't want to bring this up to say anything, because when we look at these type of statistics, there's a lot that goes into it besides just looking at numbers, but let's look at this really quickly. Now, what is going on here? Is this because I'm on a school computer? Anyway, this is looking at homicide rates from the last several years. And homicide, it's looking at male versus female. Homicides for males and females last year was equal, about 50-50. But how often are we hearing about murdered men? Not very often. How often are we hearing about people of color? Not as often. It has started to get a little bit better. How often do we hear about, you know, transgendered or non-binary people or anything else in these stories? We don't hear about it. And some of the hardest cases that I work on are missing men, and especially men of color. People simply do not engage with their cases, even in a community like New Orleans, you know? And that's something that is changing. Like, I am seeing a change, but it's extremely frustrating. Now, I will say, bigger media, they also don't have lived experience, but they're trained and they've worked on thousands of stories here. Whereas people that are creating content, they're interested in this stuff, they're interested in crime, they usually don't have lived experience. They have no idea what it's like to suffer with a missing person or a murder victim or someone who's been brutally sexually assaulted or sold into human trafficking. And so they don't have that perspective to understand when to be sensitive. And it's kind of like, you know, these podcasts will refer to my sister as whatever they call their little followers and stuff, like murderinos and stuff. That is gross and unethical. It's just weird when you think about it. They don't follow a journalistic code of ethics, obviously, because the one thing that they're really not thinking about is sensitivity and making sure that all people involved are involved with the storytelling that they're doing. It is also advertisement or view driven, which again is why I believe my sister's story continues to be told. I can't even tell y'all how many episodes about her life exist. Well, not her life, just her murder. But if we look at just one YouTube channel, look at how much money they make daily. And look how much money they're making in a month. Why would they stop? So now when I go and say, hey, can you take my sister's episode down? You made it without our consent or prior knowledge and permission. It doesn't really hurt their pockets very much. A lot of other family members do not have the strength to do this. So I speak out for all of us, even though people online act like I'm only doing it because, like, I need to go to therapy and heal my trauma from my sister's murder. I'm like, no. What we need to do is stop telling the same stories over and over again, and also tell other stories for people that, you know, need the help. And then last but not least is ulterior motive. So no hate to this guy in particular. I've just been seeing a lot of this. I don't know if it'll come up. This is a TikToker that has a series called Cold Cases and Cold Ones. Have y'all seen it?
TikTok's blocked.
Okay. Oh, I forgot. Anyway, this is like a young guy, and he drinks a case of beer while he tries to solve a cold case. He doesn't really get anywhere. And after the first one, his TikTok really blew up, and so now he's made quite a few of those. I work with a really big cold case organization, a couple of them. This stuff is not helpful. He's doing it for advertisement revenue on TikTok. And maybe he will help solve a cold case. Who knows? But it's really gross to see, I'll be honest. Then when we start to look at true crime, and you look at the types of images they see, this looks like a fiction book that you would buy as a young adult literature novel at a bookstore at a high school or middle school. These don't look like things that happen to real people. It's colorful, it's bright, they're using big, puffy fonts. And some of the names that we're seeing here, again, are just so distasteful. Why do we have a podcast that's so, oh look, there they are. Why do we have a podcast that's so big called My Favorite Murder? Do you think it would be appropriate, and please forgive me, I'm not comparing these crimes, to have a podcast that said my favorite rape, or my favorite mass shooting, or my favorite hate crime? It would be insane if there was any other type of crime that was treated the way that murder victims are treated. And the reason people do this is because they are silent. I know, I'm sorry. I'm just trying to get a point across, y'all. They're silent victims. You know what my sister can't do? Defend herself. And the image that we put out there about her is not quite accurate. I call them missing person campaigns because you're campaigning for your loved one to get attention. And what do you not want to do? You don't want to spill all their tea and say like negative, although my sister was actually a very good person and really sweet and stuff, but she was still a human being, you know? People don't know those things about her because we didn't release that to the public, and I never will. I mean, maybe one day, but you know, so when we start to look at this, this is why the public is so far removed from these cases, because hearing the stories over and over again, it makes it seem like fiction, but it is not. So let's look at some of the other issues here. and this is my realm. I don't work as much in homicide. Obviously, some of the families I've worked with have had loved ones that have been killed, but most missing people are found quickly and safely. I will say that. So, and the statistics for 2023 isn't out yet, otherwise I would have used that, but they're probably pretty similar from last year. So in 2022, about 550,000 people, 100,000 people were reported missing. Okay, so here we can kind of look at who was left over. About 22,000 cases remain unsolved. Where are the podcasts about them? Where are the YouTube and TikTok videos about them? Then we see that about 14,000 were unidentified, and what that means is that we found their remains, but we do not know who they are for whatever reason. Technology is getting better at that. If you guys have heard of SNP DNA analysis, it's what a lot of the cold cases are being solved with now. You can take really badly degraded DNA and kind of piece it together to get a profile. And so, like, that's one of the ways they caught the Golden State Killer. And that's one of the ways they figured out who Jack the Ripper likely was. So a lot of independent forensic companies do that. The police do STR analysis. A little different. You need to have more genetic information. And then 13,000+ people were just unclaimed, where they identified them and no one ever came to pick them up. Why not? You will never know, because these stories are not being told. And yeah, it's a small percentage of the overall missing people, but it's still 22,000 people. Maybe 1% of them get their stories told in a way that is beneficial to the community and beneficial and respectful to the family, you know? So then if we go down and look at something that is more sensationalized, like homicides, and honestly, I feel like this number is low, but this is what they said online. 18,450 people were murdered last year. Where are their stories? Is it more interesting to find out about someone that was murdered mysteriously, murdered by their husband or wife, murdered by their child, compared to someone like, I saw one of my neighbors get shot and killed. He was a drug dealer. Why is his story not as interesting? He was a really nice guy, you know? This is the kind of thing, when you really start to look at it, you see the percentage of cases that are overlooked while the same stories are told over and over and over again. And the question we have to start asking these groups is why? And obviously it's for money. Why can't these stories also make them money if that is what they're doing, while also benefiting the community and our nation? So what's the deal? I'm well aware that everything that happened with my sister's case that went to court is public information. And I'm well aware that anyone can do anything they want with it. That does not mean that I'm not going to fight them. And it's not because I'm like, we have the rights. We don't make money off my sister's murder. My nonprofit, it's all nonprofit. I have a full-time job here. I teach a lot of classes to pay for my organization. And we do take some income, but websites and stuff are expensive. So like, I don't make money off of missingness. I don't make money off of trauma or murder, but other people do. And so let's just look at this really quickly. There's a Freedom of Information Act. And the reason this exists is so that the public can actually hold the criminal justice system accountable. But a lot of people have started taking this and saying, oh, well, we have this wealth of information that we can use to tell stories with. The storytelling is not a bad idea. It's the way that these stories are being told. And sometimes, you know, there's a lot of cases that come out that do cause terrible law enforcement officials to be fired. I'm not going to lie. There's a case I've been working on in Florida. I think the sheriff might get forced into retirement soon, and he deserves it. You know what I mean? But most law enforcement is good. And most, you know, media is good. And most true crime content creators are good. But they're doing this in unethical ways. One of the things that we're starting to see, I've learned I'm called an advocate. So in the advocacy world is people are getting fed up with this. So a great example that did go more high profile had to do with the Dahmer special that Netflix produced. And I didn't watch it. Again, I don't consume it because I know what it does to family members, but I'm not judging you if you do. I don't think a lot of people realize that this is made without permission or acknowledgement. So the victims' family members were so upset that Netflix did this. They said that they weren't contacted or asked about it. The guy who directed it said he attempted to reach out to the families, probably not very hard. And I guarantee you that they probably would have said no. Who doesn't know who Jeffrey Dahmer is? You know, why do we have to keep sensationalizing and looking at these murders over and over and over again? What purpose does it have? Everyone, we can be victims of violent crime. People can target us and kill us, and we know that. There's maybe some lessons to be learned about how to do things more safely, not to go out at night, stuff like that. But the fact is, if someone wants to target you, they will, you know? And so we're starting to see advocates, the living victims, and other victims of violent crime that are living get absolutely fed up with this, and they are starting to push back against this. What is taking so long for what I call posthumous PR representation, because it's part of the news and because it is public information, it's really hard to sort of say, yeah, just the victims of violent crime should get PR representation so that people can't constantly make profit off of their stories. Because that also involves politicians and maybe like people who do hurt other people and people that sell people into human trafficking, because they may be victims as well. So it's a lot more complicated than just saying, this should be illegal. My purpose is, they just shouldn't be able to make money, and if they are gonna make something at all that's public, they should just have to legally get permission. It would take 5 seconds. And a lot of families would say yes, and some families would say no after a while. We thought we were done 8 years ago. So what this is a victim's right issue. And I think this is the issue that no one's ever really thought about until recently. So what is a victim's rights, or what is it? The right to be treated with fairness, dignity, sensitivity, and respect. And I'm not saying that these shows that are being put out aren't giving my sister sensitivity and respect, but the act of making money off her story is inherently disrespectful because she can't consent to it. We really can't consent to this either, which is why we chose to do a few shows. Then we kind of felt weird about it, but we were going through so much trauma, we sort of said, we better stop doing this. Little did we know that true crime would be such a thing coming up in our lifetime. And so this is, you know, again, a code of ethics that people follow. And there's laws about victims' rights, but not about the victims of murder, just all other victims. And that's why we don't hear about podcasts about sexual assaults, maybe a serial rapist, but not sexual assault survivors because of HIPAA. And it does become public information, but they change their names. And, you know, again, murder or sexual assault, we're not comparing trauma here, but just to give you a different perspective about a crime that happens to lots of people. So how do we consume true crime ethically? Pay attention to whether or not the family is involved. It's like with Counterclock, in the first episode of the season I'm listening to, you hear family members come in really quickly, which means they agreed to do this. And there's lots of things you might see if you Google my sister's names where you will see us speaking because we agreed to do that, right? There's going to be a lot of stories you find where they're talking about me and they're talking about my current life and what I've been up to, but they never talk to me, and that's weird. It really is. Has the family been mentioned intimately? Meaning, if they don't want to be featured, have they been conversing with them? If the answer is no, the family probably is not aware that they're making it, let alone involved. And do we get money from these groups? No, of course not. Is the group monetizing their content? And I'm talking less about advertisement revenue, more about private monetization, doing paywalls, doing private groups that are paying and subscribing for these things, like putting it on a Patreon. That is for money, period. Are they only covering high-profile cases? And are they perpetuating this big issue, missing white woman syndrome? So if you're not familiar with this, this is the media phenomenon where they tend to amplify cases like my sister's more than other cases. Even in areas like ours where, you know, we're like 50-50 black and white here. And even higher profile cases here involving like women of color really don't take off the way that a missing white woman will. There was a teacher from Xavier who went missing with her vehicle. I think she was from Xavier. or maybe she was actually a K through 12. Anyway, she went missing with her vehicle. She was a African American black woman. That was one of the more high profile cases I've seen in New Orleans. It happened in 2014, I believe.
I was gonna say it was right after I moved here, and then they found her car in
Yeah.
Bayou St. John. Yeah.
Yeah, and like, you know, experience tells you that if someone's missing with their vehicle, they're probably with their vehicle somewhere. But that's not always true, which is why you don't say that publicly. You know, you have to approach it with sensitivity. But if we're seeing a bunch of the same types of people and the same types of cases over and over again, they're only perpetuating the same issue with media. Okay, so actually I'm at the end, and it looks like we have 5 minutes left, so this is perfect timing. And I guess the overall thing I would like for y'all to take away from this is that just be aware that a lot of the stuff that we do listen to involving crimes did not involve the family members at all. And if you're not involving the people whose lives you're talking about, that is unethical. It's not illegal, but it is unethical. Okay. So do y'all have any comments or questions?
Do you think like solved cases get more coverage because they're solved and people are more attracted to like the full circle and like seeing
Sure.
what happened and who did it?
That's a mindset, and I think that it is true because a lot of people don't want to cover unsolved cases. This particular group that I was talking about, though, tend to only cover unsolved cases. So why did they cover my sister's case? But yes, a lot of groups only want to cover solved cases because there's a conclusion so that their audience can have that conclusion. Absolutely. But why does it need to be told 1,000 times over the course of 12 years? That's the real question. But yeah, that's a beautiful point.
I have a question. What do you think is the most critical time when a person goes missing?
Oh, ASAP. Because really, what you want to do is get that last known location. And the easiest way to do that is to ping their cell phone and track that camera footage. And that's the fastest way because let's say someone is in their vehicle and they go off road, there's going to be a camera where they are and a camera where they aren't. Or like I worked on an Alzheimer's disease case where a man just left his home and walked, and he ended up in a kind of drainage pond, but we were able to track him through the neighborhood security camera up to that place, so we knew where to look. So you want to do it as quickly as possible, and I hate to like say the first 48 hours is critical because you hear that in crime all the time, but it is true. The faster you can report someone missing, the better. And if worse comes to worse, they take the missing person report, which happens a lot, and then 3 hours later the missing person turns up. That's okay, you know? It's when they are missing and it's been more than a couple of days, you're kind of losing critical information. But it's better to file it later than not at all. I will say that.
I don't want to sound ignorant if I ask this question, but I do want to ask, like, how long do you think it takes for, like, investigators to close a case? Like, after, like, 2 weeks or so? Not even 2 weeks, but, like, months? Like, how long do you think?
It really depends. I know that one of the reasons my sister's case did conclude within 3 months is because it was so high profile and they got so much information. But you know, if the police don't have any evidence or things to follow up on, that's why cases go cold. So one of the things, and family members don't always like this because they think, we reported this, the police's goal is to protect our community, so they should find our loved one, but the family has a role, and it's really to raise a lot of awareness so that people know about it, information comes in. So when cases don't get any coverage or any family members that are really engaged, it takes significantly longer because police get less information. And if police aren't doing their job, there's very professional ways to make them do it. You use the media to your advantage.
Is it true that you can't report somebody missing in the first 24 hours?
That's a myth.
That's a myth?
You should do it as soon as you really believe someone is missing. And what the police will tell you is call hospitals, call rehabilitation centers, anything like mental health institutes, and if your loved one's not there, call us back and file a report. But sometimes they do make families wait 1 or 2 days, which is infuriating. But especially with like runaway cases, sometimes they make families wait.
Speaking in the entire genre of true crime, what is the best way to find ethical things to consume?
So since this TikTok thing's been going on, and it's on Shooting Missing Persons if y'all want to look, it's crazy. A lot of people have been asking me that. Honestly, I don't know of any. I'm working with this person who used to produce a lot of true crime podcasts who's kind of reformed, and now she makes educational content for content creators to learn how to do it ethically. Her name's Haley Gray. And there is a couple YouTubers I like Kendall Ray, but I've even heard some bad things about her. You know, there's bad stuff out there, so
So it's just rough. It's just a rough situation.
it's really tough. And I think at the end of the day, as long as they're involving family members for the most part, that's about as good as it's going to get for now, you know?
So I'm really torn. We actually read an article about that, the Dahmer piece, and obviously a lot of fallback not involving the family. But I will say, and I'm not sure what my question is, but just kind of gauging what you think about this. One of the things I thought that was beneficial about that series was that, like, I remember Dahmer, I'm old enough to remember, and I just had not thought about it in so long, and I was not aware of the role of, the predatory role of regarding race, and how the police, the problem with, the reason why he wasn't caught so quickly is because the role of race and the queer community and the way he was living in a black community and stuff like that. And I was like, this actually did give a different viewpoint on what was happening in a way that maybe we can learn, like, we don't make assumptions, and police should not make assumptions in these circumstances, like let him off as a white guy in a black building. Like, so I see